Want to bring in CBS News weather producer David Parkinson here with the latest forecast. David, you know, to see the destruction in the Caribbean, to see the flooding ongoing in places like Jacksonville, Florida, the day after, it really shows how large Irma was, that the predictions weren't wrong in that sense, that this was a historic storm. How much juice does Irma still have? Is it still destructive?
Right. Well, it's amazing because it shows to you, even as it weakens in terms of its intensity, in terms of category and winds, it's still incredibly destructive, as you saw in Jacksonville, right? So as it weakened from a Category 5 where it hit Cuba with those winds to what is now a tropical storm, you still have tremendous amounts of rain. And so on this radar map here, all those counties shaded in green, those are some sort of flood warning. And so it shows you we've still got at least several inches of rain to coming down in very heavy clips. The other thing to note is that line that I drew there, it's 450 miles from the southern edge. It's expanded. As it's weakened, it's expanded out its tropical storm force wind field. So you've got a 450-mile radius of at least tropical storm force winds, which are dangerous, can take down trees.
That's 60, 65 mile per hour range, tropical?
Anything between 40 and 74.
Okay.
39 and 74 if you want to be technical. And that is where we have the strongest winds and the strongest rains. So even as it continues to weaken, right, it's almost out of the state of Florida. The last advisory, it was due east of Tallahassee. As it moves into Georgia and into Alabama, it's going to weaken even more in terms of wind, but we're still going to be dealing with the rain. And until this thing finally kicks out in a couple of days, it is a storm you have to respect, and you have to make sure that you are preparing yourself in terms of just any of the possible flooding that could occur from it. Or wind damage. Okay,
so we're talking about still really high winds. We're talking about a lot of rain. Are we still talking about tornado watches and the potential for other severe weather effects?
So there is. It's less now, especially because it's gotten so much farther inland. There's less of a ocean influence on it, which can help bring up those tornado threats. But anytime you have a tropical system in the front right quadrant, which is ahead of the center of it, and
the front right quadrant being Charleston, that South Carolina area right now?
Correct. So, so the front right is basically anywhere from Lake City, Florida, or a little north of Lake City, Florida, due north from there and due east of there. That chunk of the hurricane, or the tropical storm now, is where you have the best potential to see some tornadoes. So we're not going to be spawning them the way that we did on Saturday, where it was one warning after another, but the threat is still there.
Okay, when we look at this map, is it the yellow parts that where we're seeing greater rain?
Yes.
Okay.
So the deeper that color, you got some orange and red.
So that's Atlanta, and Atlanta has a tropical storm warning for the first time in that city's history.
Right.
What should they expect as far as rainfall there?
So the tropical storm warning is primarily because of the wind threat from there. So you're going to have winds of 30, 40 miles an hour at least, and you'll probably have gusts into the 50s and 60s.
Wow, that is unusual for a landlocked city.
Right, it is unusual, and outside of when they have severe weather season, right? So it is unusual for a prolonged period of time, and that's the big thing, is because even though the storm is moving at 18 miles an hour and it is clearing much quicker than it was before, you are going to have those winds for a long duration of time. So over time, the wind will weaken, you know, trees and other things like that, and loosen things that might have only just slightly swayed on a you know, minute or two gust. If you've got it at that speed for an hour or two, you have the tendency to have a lot more things that are going to come down, and that's what we're most concerned about. So that's why you've got the tropical storm warning. Outside of that, in terms of rain totals, you're looking at anywhere between another 2 and 6 inches of rain before this thing wraps up in that area. So there's the potential for flash flooding. There's also the potential, the wind is still coming in off the water in coastal South Carolina and coastal Georgia. And what that means is, when you're looking at storm surge, the highest ever recording that we're going to have in Savannah will happen this afternoon at the reading station there. You've got the highest ever storm surge reading in Jacksonville today. You're in the top 3 in Charleston.
Jacksonville is the most populated city in Florida. Charleston is an incredibly densely populated area, so we're talking about places that are really built up, and when we're talking about storm surge, we're talking about potential major property damage.
Correct, right, and so in Jacksonville, it wasn't just on the beach where Jerika was this morning, it was into the city, which is several miles inland, so it all came up the river there, the St. James River.
Is that going to get worse?
It should be wrapping up, fortunately, so things should start to subside in the next couple of hours. But the damage is done. I mean, that thing went into downtown. That's why there was the flash flood emergency there. You've got a river overtopping its banks. So even as the rain has stopped, you've still got to get all of that water back within the banks of the river before they're completely out of the clear there. And there are some rivers farther south in the state of Florida where the water has to get into them and come back out, where we've gotten, we had almost 2 feet of rain in Fort Pierce from this storm. We had over a foot of rain in Sanford. We had over a foot of rain in Gainesville. So there were still some very healthy rain totals, and all of that water does have to make its way back out to a large body of water. And while doing so, we do still have rivers that are going to be atop their banks.
Cresting, and we still have tidal flooding potential as well this afternoon.
So with each tide cycle, things get less dangerous, right? The storm surge is less bad, but because the level is so high to begin with, it doesn't take a whole lot from the high tide to push things back over.
Right.
So that's what people are really concerned about.
That water's got to go somewhere. David Parkinson, our weather producer here at CBS. David, thank you.
Of course.